Jeff Nixon interviews with the Texans, and let's talk about Syracuse's 2025 schedule.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on tonight's show, we are going over the fact that offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon interviewed for the Houston Texans job, and plus, we're going to talk about Syracuse's 2025 schedule. Sound good to everyone? All right, great. Before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, so Syracuse offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon, he interviewed for the Houston Texans offensive coordinator job per ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, and this was reported last night. Now, let's go over some context, and I will give you my thoughts on it. So, the Houston Texans, their offensive coordinator job is open because they recently fired Bobby Slowik, and Syracuse had the number 7 total offense in the country in 2024 under Jeff Nixon, with Kyle McCord leading the nation in passing yards. And given Jeff Nixon's success with Kyle McCord and the Houston Texans having C.J. Stroud, who just had a little bit of a sophomore slump, it's no wonder why the Texans are at least interested in interviewing for Jeff Nixon, and we'll see whether or not this actually pans out and Nixon ultimately goes to the Houston Texans. But obviously, there's interest because, well, they got their own franchise quarterback. You look at what he just did with Kyle McCord, it kind of makes sense why they would want to hire a guy like Jeff Nixon. So, I have 2 takeaways from this. Let's start off with welcome to the good season tax, ladies and gentlemen. The good season tax. When a team is successful, no matter the level, no matter the sport, other teams are going to come calling about the coaches. We see this in literally every sport at every level. And Jeff Nixon, and Syracuse for that matter, had a tremendous season. As I told you, they had the number 7 total offense in the country. Kyle McCord was amazing. The team went 10-3. So it's no wonder why a guy like Jeff Nixon is going to get called for promotions. Offensive coordinator potentially with the Texans. We also saw him appear in rumors for the Temple head coaching job. Now, that didn't end up happening. Fran Brown turned it away pretty quickly. But we saw that happen as well with Jeff Nixon. And this is what I call the quote-unquote good season tax. Because whether Nixon leaves or not, teams are going to call. That's just how it goes when your team, when your program, especially a program like Syracuse, has a really good season. And by the way, if the Orange have another good year in 2025, teams are going to call about Fran Brown. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Fran Brown's going to leave Syracuse football. But what I am saying is don't kid yourself. Let's say Syracuse, with that tough schedule they got in 2025, they go 8-4, 9-3 again. Teams are going to call about Fran Brown. Doesn't mean he's going to take it. It doesn't mean he's even going to be interested in it. But he's going to get that. His phone is going to ring. That's just how it works. It's called the good season tax, which is a good thing, by the way. The good season tax is a positive step for a program, for a team. An example that I came up with is the Detroit Lions in the NFL. The Detroit Lions, granted, they got knocked out early in the playoffs. They got upset by the Commanders. But in the regular season, they went 15-2. They lost both their coordinators to head coaching jobs in the NFL. Ben Johnson went to the Bears. Aaron Glenn to my favorite team, the New York Jets. I wish him the best, obviously. But that's a great sign of a competent organization. They just had a quote-unquote good season, and they lose both their coordinators. That's how it goes. And so for Syracuse, whether Nixon gets the job or not, it is a positive step in the right direction, which leads me to number 2. I am not worried just yet about Jeff Nixon leaving Syracuse. Selfishly, I want Jeff Nixon to stay. Why? Well, they just had an elite offense. It's late January. Connecting the dots here, it's kind of late. Who is going to be the offensive coordinator if Jeff Nixon goes? So selfishly, I would want him to stay. And it also should be noted that his son, Will Nixon, is currently on the team. Whether that plays a factor or not in Jeff Nixon's decision, I am not entirely sure. But it should be noted that his son is literally on the team. Now, if Jeff Nixon ends up leaving, of course, I will be happy for him personally, and I'll be happy for the program in general because it's a good sign when other teams are calling and poaching your coaches. So I'll be happy for him, right? However, I'm not going to worry, and nor should you really, about something that has not happened yet. It hasn't happened. I mean, if he leaves, then we'll talk about potential offensive coordinator replacements. Nunzio Campanelli, I think, would be the quarterback coach. I think he would maybe be an offensive coordinator. But there's no time to really worry about that right now. Jeff Nixon is still the offensive coordinator of Syracuse football. Of course, after a great season, there's going to be conversations about him landing potentially another job. Per ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, he did interview with the Houston Texans, and it was reported last night. But for now, the status quo remains the status quo. So for Syracuse, it's the good season, ladies and gentlemen. Good season tax. I love to hear from you in the comments section below your thoughts on Jeff Nixon interviewing for the Houston Texans offensive coordinator job. If you are a Houston Texans fan, I'll let you know right now, I think it would be a good hire for you all. I don't know how many Houston Texans fans are watching or listening to a Locked On Syracuse podcast, but if you did stumble upon it, I welcome you. It's a great hire. He runs a spread offense if they were to do it. And I think CJ Stroud, I would draft him in fantasy if you hire him, by the way. However, I'm not worried just yet. Nothing has changed as of this recording, which is January 28th at 12:44 p.m. Eastern. A lot could change in 5 hours from now when you guys are watching or listening to this. All right, so that covers it with Jeff Nixon. Now coming up, we'll talk about Syracuse football's 2025 schedule. As I promised yesterday, we're going to talk about it next here on Locked On Syracuse. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll store $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Syracuse football's 2025 schedule officially came out last night. Now, we knew the opponents, and we knew some of the dates. Like, we knew that Syracuse was going to open the season in a neutral site game in Atlanta against Tennessee. But we found out the order of the opponents last night, the dates of the games, and the bye weeks. Now, the times of each game are to be determined. That's from television deals and everything like that during the season, how every season's unfolding, when they want to schedule each game, etc. But we know the dates, and we know the order, and we know the bye weeks. And I have 4 takeaways from Syracuse's schedule, and we'll split it into 2 different segments here for this show, all right? Number 1, happy Halloween, everyone. No, it's not October 31st, 2025, but if you love Halloween and if you are an adult and you have children, well, guess what? Syracuse football is playing on Halloween. That's right. It is a Friday night game against North Carolina. And that's when UNC's new head coach is coming to town. Have you heard of North Carolina's new head coach, by the way? His name is Bill Belichick. If you haven't heard of him, I highly suggest Googling him. He's a pretty good coach, one of the all-time great coaches in the history of football, and that'll be Syracuse's first look at UNC's Bill Belichick. The one thing that I will say about it, though, I was kind of hoping that Syracuse was going to get UNC towards the beginning of the season. And the reason why is because it's possible with North Carolina and Bill Belichick, it takes time for them to really find their footing. And so I would rather catch them potentially in that adjustment period earlier in the season rather than later in the season on October 31st, when you would figure that Bill Belichick and North Carolina by that point have adjusted to college football. That's the one thing I'll really say about that, honestly, but I love it. They're playing on Halloween. That's pretty cool. It's on a Friday night, and I hope everyone can go to the Dome on that night. That leads me to my second takeaway of Syracuse football's 2025 schedule reveal. We finally got October home games, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are as excited as I am. Syracuse football is playing 2 October home games in 2025. That includes the North Carolina game on October 31st on Halloween. But the first one is October 18th against Pitt off a bye. We don't speak about the last time Syracuse played Pitt off a bye week. We don't talk about that. But that was a road game too. This one will be at home. But in all seriousness, I am really happy that Syracuse football is playing multiple October home games. If you recall, they had no home games in October in 2024. They had no home games in October of 2023. The last time they had an October home game was in 2022. It's a long time to go without an October home game. And see, this is actually really good for the fan base in general because it helps the students out. The students make up a pretty big portion of the fan base. Wouldn't you think? The student section, it can get loud and rowdy. Well, guess what? In October, they're on campus. So they can go to the games. They're right there. They're on campus. However, when you backload the schedule of home games in November, well, guess what? That's when Thanksgiving break is occurring. And I could speak personally about what students do usually during Thanksgiving break because I was just a student at Syracuse University. If you're not from the area, chances are you're going home for Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving break, it lasts about a week, week and a half. So they're not going to the game usually. That's just how it goes. Sometimes they'll fly back early. Maybe they'll fly back a little bit later. Sure, that could obviously happen, but I think it's better that you have the home games in October so everybody can go. Whereas if it's in November, like they usually are with all the home games, well, I could speak from personal experience. Not a lot of the students are going to want to go because it's Thanksgiving break. So overall, Syracuse football, first 2 takeaways I had from the schedule. Number 1, happy Halloween, everyone. They're playing North Carolina on October 31st at home. That should be a fun one. It's a Friday night. And number 2 October home games should really benefit Syracuse football. Now, coming up, 2 more takeaways from Syracuse football schedule. So if I'm missing something, please bear with me. Maybe I will get to it in the next segment. If not, feel free to chime in the comment section below your thoughts on Syracuse's 2025 schedule. We'll continue this conversation next here on Locked On Syracuse. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is Locked On Syracuse, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. We talked about Jeff Nixon interviewing with the Houston Texans. We went over a couple of thoughts on the schedule, the first two in case you missed it. Happy Halloween. Syracuse is playing on Halloween at home against North Carolina, and also the Orange are going to have a couple of October home games in 2024. They had no October home games. Same thing with 2023, no October home games. So finally, the Orange are going to be playing inside the JMA Wireless Dome in the month of October in 2025. Now let's continue the conversation about Syracuse's 2025 schedule. Number 3, the Miami date is good. The Notre Dame date, not very good. We knew that Syracuse football was going to play on the road against Miami, and we knew they were also going on the road to play Notre Dame. We just didn't know when until last night. Let's start with the good, which is when the Miami game is occurring. This is awesome for the fans, and this is awesome for the team. For the fans, if you're planning on making the trip to South Florida, which is my neck of the woods, guess what? Early November, it's on November 8th at Miami. I would say that's a pretty good date because you can go to the game and not be sweating bullets. That's the good news. If it was in September, trust me, I have gone to Miami games, not the Miami Hurricanes, Miami Dolphins, New York Jets in September. It's not fun. It's about 100 degrees in that stadium. Not fun at all. You're sweating. But they're playing on November 8th, which is good. But this is also really, really good for the team. And let me explain Hard Rock Stadium where the Miami Hurricanes play. Tell you why. So the way they built their stadium is by design. With the sun. See, the architects of the stadium, they know the weather and they know the sun patterns. This is where we get all scientific here on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. During game time, so let's say 12, 1, 2 o'clock, everything like that, the sun is directly towards the away team's sideline, whereas where the Hurricanes play and where the Dolphins play, they're in the shade during the course of the game. If this game were in September, I am not joking. If Syracuse were playing in September in Miami, it could be 100 degrees on their sideline. That is really, really hot. So heat could really become a factor in that game. And the Miami side is in the shade. They're all cool. They're all fine. But because it's in November, while the sun is not changing the pattern, it's going to be a little bit cooler. It's not going to be, in all likelihood, 90 plus degrees outside. Chances are early November, you're looking at 70s, maybe low 80s. So overall, very, very good date getting the Miami game on November 8th. However, you take the good with the bad. The Notre Dame game is on November 22nd. Oh, that's going to be cold. That is going to be cold, and it's possible it snows on November 22nd. If Syracuse, let's say Jeff Nixon does return to Syracuse, which I would guess will happen, but we'll see over the course of the offseason if he decides to move on. But let's say he stays and Syracuse, again, runs a pass-happy offense. They're going to go on the road at Notre Dame, second last game of the season, November 22nd. It's going to be freezing cold and potentially snowing. That doesn't bode well for a pass-happy offense in Notre Dame. I'm just saying that. Meanwhile, Notre Dame is a team that, A, they're used to the elements, and B, they typically run a run-first offense anyway. That's their bread and butter. They want to dominate the line of scrimmage, and they want to play smash-mouth, old-school football. That's literally what got them to the national championship game this past season. So take the good with the bad. Syracuse gets Miami at a favorable date, November 8th, but they get Notre Dame later in the season, which means the weather is certainly going to be a factor in that one. Finally, my final takeaway from Syracuse football's 2025 schedule, I really, really like the bye week structure that they were given. Syracuse will begin the season playing 6 consecutive games before they have their first bye week. Then after their bye week, they will play 4 more games before their next bye week. And then they will play 2 games to close out the season. So the exact bye week dates are October 11th and November 15th. And this is a much better structure than what Syracuse had last season and what they dealt with. It's not an excuse in this. I'm not blaming the bye week schedule last year for why they lost after bye weeks, because they lost both their games last year after the bye. However, it was not favorable at all. Last year in 2024, they got a bye week after the first 2 games of the season. And then they played another 4 games before their next bye week. So they played only 6 games and they had 2 bye weeks in those first 6 games. So they played the rest of the season with no bye weeks. I didn't love that bye week structure at all. Now, it didn't really hurt them in the end in terms of they won games down the stretch. Didn't really seem to affect them. But still, all things being equal, you would rather have it more balanced like it is this season. You don't want it for the first 2 weeks. Why do you need a bye week after 2 weeks in the season? It makes absolutely no sense to me. Why are bye weeks in there to begin with? To rest up, to get healthy, to recover from whatever ailments are going on around the team and the players. 2 weeks into the season, that's when the team is typically as healthy as it's ever going to get. So that's not when you need the bye. You need the bye as you get into the meat of the season, which is what Syracuse is going through right now. They're going to get one after the first 6 games to rest up and recover. Then they're going to play 4 more, get another bye week, and then they have 2 more games to close out the season, and they're going to be fully rested for that because of the bye week. So I like it. It's also going to, that second bye week, by the way, is coming right before the Notre Dame game. So that'll give them extra time to prepare for Notre Dame. Hopefully that helps them out. And then they got Boston College at home to close out the regular season. Now, if I missed something with scheduled takeaways, I would love for you now to chime in. Let me know your thoughts on Syracuse's schedule in the comment section below. Just some of your takeaways on it, not necessarily the opponents that Syracuse is playing, because again, we knew the opponents. That wasn't breaking news. In fact, you can go look up 2026. The opponents are probably out right now. If you go on Syracuse football future schedules, it's there. But we learned the dates of the games. We learned the bye weeks. We learned the structure in general. I would say, all things being considered, I think it's a pretty, it's not an easy schedule in terms of opponents, but they did get a nice break from the ACC in terms of how the schedule is structured with the bye weeks and when they are playing their opponents. The only downside is they're playing Notre Dame in late November. That's going to stink. But overall, I like it. I love to hear from you in the comments section below. As far as what is coming up on the podcast in the future, tomorrow, we got a full podcast on the quarterbacks Syracuse football is going to face next season. There are a lot of good ones on the schedule. A lot. Cade Klubnik, Carson Beck, Kevin Jennings. There's so many. Darian Mensah. There's a lot that we're going to talk about tomorrow. Plus, I hope you guys are drinking some coffee tomorrow night, because Syracuse basketball is playing at Stanford at 11 p.m. Eastern. There will be a full post-game reaction podcast. Now, having said that, that full post-game reaction podcast is going to count for the Thursday podcast. And the reason, because it's going to be like 2 a.m. by the time that podcast gets posted. So it's going to be a late night for me. If you're watching or listening to the game, it's going to be a late night for you. But you know what? We as Syracuse fans, we've done it before. Ladies and gentlemen, we've done it. We've experienced late night Syracuse games. I mean, we just did it with football, right? We went to UNLV this past season. That was a late night for everyone. That was certainly a fun game too. And I hope Syracuse basketball pulls out a win at Stanford, because my goodness, it's not going to be very fun watching that game at 11 p.m. It's probably going to end around 1 in the morning. Syracuse gets blown out, I will be very, very upset. Hopefully they don't, but that's what's coming up on the podcast. We're talking about the quarterbacks during the day tomorrow. and then Syracuse basketball traveling to Stanford at 11 p.m. tomorrow night, which will be the Thursday podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs, they keep it real and bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. Find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. And if you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse so this channel can grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And thank you to all those who continue to subscribe. And I will see you all again tomorrow to talk about quarterbacks. And then later in the night and into the early morning on Thursday, we'll talk some Syracuse basketball. See you all again really soon.